Our conversation from here on is going to be on the Petroleum Industry Bill. Now, this is a bill that is not new to Nigerians, and as much as possible, most Nigerians and, of course, investors into the oil and gas sector are anxious to see this bill passed. Now, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, organized private sector, actually brought out a report, and they talked about some issues, and so that's what we're going to be looking at for most of the rest of the show. I'm being joined on the program by the Director of Research and Advocacy of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Vincent Wani, as well as an oil and gas lawyer, Tolulope Aderemi, who also is a senior associate with Perchstone and Grace. Gentlemen, good morning, and thank you so much for joining me on the program this morning.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's start with why the PIB, that's the Petroleum Industry Bill, is so important.
Okay, can I go first? Well, that's an interesting question because since 1999 or thereabout, we've had a single legislation, of course with subsidiary legislations, which appear to govern what you will consider to be the most important sector of the Nigerian economy, the sector that contributes about 78% of total revenue and 14.2% of our GDP. Now, I've had several discussions whether the law or the legislations, they're outdated. I take a personal view that they're not exactly outdated. Rather than embark upon what I call the daunting task of consolidating about 16 legislations into one, if we were to pick each of the 16 legislations, and in the course of today, I probably will pick one and give you one or two very good examples of how their significance can not be underestimated, as well as the problems they have created, some of which have become subject of litigation today. So, when you talk of the PIB is a laudable effort, I quite agree, but I'm sure you will also agree with me that its complexities are apparent. That is why you have, for instance, it's taken about 13 years for that law or that bill to become law.
Okay,
yeah.
So now I'm going to come to you, Vincent, on this one. Why now? Why has the organized private sector decided to talk about the Petroleum Industry Bill now?
Not now. We've been talking about PIB over the time because, like my colleague rightly mentioned, it's a very important sector that controls about 80% of total revenue and about 95% of foreign exchange in the country. Like you mentioned, also contributing significantly to the GDP of the country, about 14.5%. So it's very, very important. Yes. And because of course, job is created, and it's a, can I call it a derived sector? It's a sector that sits, and from that sector, a lot of factor of production also come out. Without a good and vibrant oil and gas industry, our aspiration for a reformed power, which again trickles down to a vibrant economy, will not happen. So it is very important, and we cannot stop talking about PIB until the right thing is done.
Otolope, you want to add something to that?
Yes, yes. Just to add to what he just said, I think what has triggered the private sector, and like you rightly said, I agree with him, we've been discussing this for a while.
Yes.
The controversy surrounding the PIB, like you rightly know, is the lack of investment in that sector for a number of years now. It's about 6 to 7 years. But what is more fundamental is the fact that government is losing huge revenue. The organized private sector would also argue that the imposition of certain fiscal terms is also costing the organized private sector huge losses as well.
But then the government is arguing that the fiscal provisions were to generate more revenue. Is that not a good proposition? Okay, Vincent, you want to say something? Sorry.
Because I'm representing the practitioners here.
Yes, organized private sector.
The PIB, that is the draft PIB as it is today, if that bill is passed, of course, the laudable objective of this bill, of that bill, will be defeated, 100% defeated. In fact, like he said, 13 years of trying to pass a particular bill has already created a serious uncertainty in that sector, making new investment not to happen, whether in the shallow or deep waters. No, we are not seeing anything coming out. But more importantly, like he mentioned, the way the PIB is crafted today, both the physical and non-physical term, is a huge disincentive for operators going forward. Even
let's specify those provisions that we find, or that most of the investors find most unattractive. Are we talking about the tax royalties, the community development content or management? Which part of those provisions are we referring to?
Okay, for example, gas. In the draft PIB, gas taxation on gas have been moved from 30% to 80%, and this gas is what we're basing our economy, because if we get gas right, of course, the power turbines will work, and like I said, you cook in your house and everything. The way gas taxation is crafted right now, by increasing it from 30 to 80%, there is no operator that will want to even invest in gathering these gases, or even trying to make more investment in that. Between 2010 to 2013, about $100 billion investment that should have come to gas exploration in the country never came, and you know the impact of this on job, on other subsidiary sectors in that industry. That is a key example. Again, if you look at pre-PIB, that is the regime we're operating right now, the physicals, both royalties, government take, and taxes for shallow waters, for deep water, and even for gas is huge. It's relatively higher than most countries operating in Africa and international, and increasing this government take from what it is now. Okay, for example, currently we have the government take on shallow water is like onshore and shallow water is 70%. The new PIB is going to be 92%, which will be the highest in the world, and this is not acceptable.
Let me just add one or two things to what he has said, and this is just to put these issues in proper perspective. I hear this argument a lot, and I dare say that the arguments, they're formidable on the two sides.
Which two sides are we looking at?
From the government side and from the private sector. Now, let me take the private sector, for instance. There's introduction under the PIB of what you now have as mandatory companies income tax. Okay. I'm not sure, I want to believe you're also familiar with the 93 PSs, which makes it mandatory for oil companies operating in the oil sector not to pay companies income tax. And those PSs are still in existence. Now, if the law were to be passed today as it is, what it means is that every oil operator will be paying 30% CITA. At the same time, like you rightly said, for onshore, you'll be paying 50%, and for deep sea, you'll be paying 25%. So, in total, for onshore, you're paying 80%, and for deep sea, you're paying 55%. If you look at that very carefully, you probably argue, and it's a formidable argument, that I'm going to be losing a lot of money. And I take you quickly back, and this, I'm just struggling. This explains why I said to you that the 16 legislations, they're complex on their own. And I've only just taken one of them. That's the deep offshore production sharing contract. Under that act, section 16 to be specific, it gives the government the opportunity to review its take from the oil industry. Okay. Now, that's very interesting because that law was passed in 1999. Now, the first set of PSCs that were signed in Nigeria was signed in 1993. That was 6 years before that law came into existence. What it means is that 6 years before then, there was the contemplation that government should review its take once the price of crude oil hits $20 per barrel. I will tell you that as at 1993, when these PSCs were signed, oil companies had gone into the international market and they had tested the price of crude, and it was way above $20 per barrel. Government at that time did not trigger that provision. Of course, I could also argue that the IOCs themselves, they have a corresponding obligation to trigger that provision. But put that aside for one moment. That same legislation gives the government the privilege again to review, once it hits $20, to also review it after another 15 years. Now, after that 15 years, you do it every other 5 years. So you have that window to review what your take is. So what we're discussing, and I like what he said, what we're discussing is a question of liquidity on the part of the oil operators. So if you're saying that for almost about 20 years or thereabout, you have not taken what you're ordinarily entitled to, you now want to wake up overnight to do it all of a sudden, then it creates some trepidation. And it's commercial. There's no hard feelings to it. if I pay 1 naira, for instance, in terms of taxes, and you should have deducted some amount for a period of time, and you didn't do so. If you now come over the time to now want to put a huge burden on me, then I won't have the liquidity to carry on operating in that interest rate.